Hi guys. Okay, so let's start the session. So welcome to part two of beginner's introduction to DevOps practices. Okay, so yeah, let's jump into the session now. So once again, I would like to welcome you all for the part two of beginner's introduction to DevOps practices. So if you haven't seen the part one, I will add the links in this video as well as in the description. Okay. So let's see, what's there for today's session. So I am Saravanan Yanaguru, and I'm working as a DevOps Society practitioner, and I'm also a developer, having more than 17 years of experience. And I'm passionate about writing technical blogs to share my knowledge. And I'm kind of open for free mentoring sessions for early career folks and anyone wanting to talk about or open source contribution or blog writing or whatever it is. I do that mentoring for free. Since I'm a community contributor, I have been recognized as a HashiCorp ambassador and AWS community builder. So yeah, and I'm passionate about designing anything on automating infrastructure solutions and application deployment solutions. Right. So that's about myself, and I'm currently exploring entrepreneurship path and working as freelancer for a few clients. And you can just check out my portfolio regarding my blog contributions and portfolio that contains my resume and if you want to book slot also, there is a Calendly link available in my portfolio. Okay, so yeah, with that, let me move on to the session. So in part one, this is a summary I would like to cover in this session as well, on a high level, basically. So in part one, we have gone through about what is DevOps practice and what are all involving in DevOps practice. In that, we discussed about DevOps is a kind of organizational mindset change in which every team has to come together to achieve one single goal for deploying error-free application as early as possible to the production environment. So that's a common goal towards everybody from the organization, from top management till the developer has to work on that particular goal, right? So DevOps practice is basically combining all the teams together and using the automation and continuous improvement and feedback process, it will be achieved actually. So that's the high level concept on DevOps practice we discussed. It's basically an organizational change, and it needs the way people are working from silos to the single team mentality, right? And in that DevOps practices, there are various aspects we covered, agile development teams and the CI/CD practices, continuous automation, test automation, and the security practices, and monitoring and observability. These are all the pillars of DevOps practices. Okay, and my session is going to mainly focusing on setting up a automation deployment part. That covers from the build to deployment and setting up monitoring for applications. So this is a part two in that series, and let's discuss what is there in the session. Okay, and we also see how to adapt and implement DevOps practices, and the CI/CD is one of the main pillar of it, and that is what we are going to cover in this today's session and as well as upcoming sessions, right? So I would like to touch upon the general flow of deployment automation or CI/CD flow, or whatever the way you wanted to call it, you can call it. I would like to call it as a deployment automation because this entire flow is kind of building the code and automating this deployment to the production, right? So that's why I'm calling it as a deployment automation, but it can be called as a CI/CD pipeline or anything, anyone, whichever is comfortable to you, you can consider that. So basically, like the general flow of automation for CI/CD starts whenever developer picks up the task, feature task from the Jira board or whatever the task management tool the team is following, right? And then they will be start working on the developing that particular feature, right? And before that, anyway, before coming in, before the task coming into that Jira board and all, right? Anyway, that there are something else that needs to be already done, like backlog creation and backlog scoping, design analysis, and all would be there. I'm not debating it here, but they are also part of the entire flow of a requirement, right? So basically, like CI/CD starts from the part wherein the developer picks up the code, task from Jira kind of tools, and they will be start working on it. And then they will be building the code and unit testing it, and then they will be creating the package out of it, right? And whether it's a war file or depending on the programming languages, it could be changing, right? So basically, that's a basically the development process. And in deployment automation or CI/CD, it is called as continuous integration, basically, right? So that's what it starts from the part when the developer develops the code, and the package would be created out of the developed code as an artifact, right? And there is also some other stages related to security. I'm not depicting it here because there is a separate session I'm planning to take on integrating security aspects in the CI/CD pipeline. But this is a beginner session, so I would like to cover what is CA, CD, and those kind of aspects, right? So that's the idea, right? And then whenever the flow ends with package creation, right? So it will be pushed into artifact tools like Nexus or any kind of container hub registry or anything like that, right? So that CA process ends with the uh, code package will be created and checked in into the pushed into the package repository tools, basically. And then uh, uh, and then comes the continuous deployment part. So as I mentioned in the previous session also, there are two things in CI/CD. So CI is continuous integration, and CD also can be would be having a continuous deployment as well as continuous delivery. So basically, continuous deployment can be used if there are any no approvals needed when pushing the code to the other environments, right? So in this case, the lower test environment, we don't need to create any approval flow and all. But it's not a hard and fast rule. If any teams wanted to have on approval deployment even in lower environment, they can implement. But just to depict the example of continuous deployment, I have mentioned it as automated deployment in the lower test environment, right? So basically, as part of the continuous deployment, we would be creating an automated infrastructure using Terraform or something similar kind of tools, and then we will be deploying the code, right? So the requirement for the requirement for creating Terraform kind of tools in the pipeline is something like for some of the development requirement, there are some environment configuration needs to be done as a prerequisite, right? So that environment configuration can be done by creating the environment itself, and then applying the required configurations on the environment, and then the code deployment will be happening on the particular environment. So that's why we can use infrastructure automation and configuration management tools to do that stuff, and then we can deploy the code, and the testing team would be testing it, or if there are any automation test packages are already being done, and that test suite can also run, right? So that's a continuous deployment. That is about deploying the code without any approval to the environment, right? And then once after the testing is over in uh, lower test environment, then comes the continuous delivery part, wherein it will be happening only in the higher environment, like staging or production environment, wherein there are multiple stakeholder approval would be needed, and then it will be deployed, right? Basically, it's like whenever that lower test environment happens, it will be there are some regression tools should be running, and then non-functional test like performance testing will be running, and then there would be a process in Agile Scrum called the go no go call that happens with all the stakeholders from top management till the developer, whoever developed the feature, right? So once after the in the go no go call, the team would be deciding whether this feature is ready to be moved to production or not, right? So then it will be deployed. So that is called that approval process, and it can be done. It can be called in CICD process as continuous delivery, meaning that once after the approval, it will be deployed, right? Because we cannot simply deploy the untested code in higher environment, right? So that's the idea, right? So that is about the continuous integration, continuous deployment, and continuous delivery. And this is a similar flow I have created in one of my demo project. Okay, that project has been developed using Go, and I have created continuous integration and continuous deployment flow for the demo purpose, right? So that's anyway that anyway I'll be covering up in the upcoming part three of the session. I'll be going through the Golang code, and I'll show one by one what I have created with respect to CI/CD pipeline creation, right? Okay, so yeah, so this is the pipeline high level I have created for my demo project. So I have created the pipeline orchestration using GitHub Actions. So basically, once after in my demo project, I have created the Go code, and I have uh, done the basic done things like developing the code and writing the unit test using Go test, and then I have tested it locally, right? And then once after everything is working, it will be pushed into the GitHub. So GitHub will be having a check on every code push in the particular branch of repository. It will be triggering the GitHub action, right? And GitHub action is a YAML file, and anyway, I will also take a session on GitHub action workflows and how to create that. And yeah, and once after the GitHub action workflow YAML is being triggered, it will be triggering the continuous integration workflow, and then once after it is successful, it would be deploying the continuous deployment workflow, right? So this is the high level for the demo we have created, right? So in my the repository I have created, okay. So yeah, and this is the demo scenario. I have further drilled down to the expanded the view of the entire CI/CD pipeline. So the top section is kind of continuous integration of the automation, and the below one is the continuous deployment part, right? So basically, in my scenario, I'd be developing the code in Golang, and I'll be pushing it. On the push of this, on the code push, it will be triggering the pipeline. So that pipeline would be having the commands to run go lint, go test, and go build command and all. So that basically to run the linting testing and unit testing and code build, right? So in this case, if there are any errors, immediately the pipeline will be stopping, and it will be sending the feedback to the developer. Kind of anyway, it will be showing the error in the log also, and it will be we can also make it notifying that error to the whoever developed as well, right? And then once after the build code build is successful in the developer part, and it will be creating a Docker build using the Docker file I have created. So it will be used for packaging the entire Go build package that we are using to execute, right? So once after that Docker file is used to create the Docker image, it will be pushed into the Docker Hub registry. So that concludes the CI part in this workflow. And then comes the continuous deployment workflow, wherein I'm creating Minikube K8s cluster and using Terraform, and then I will be deploying the. I have written a Kubernetes deployment that is using the image that is pushed in the CI part, right? So that image will be used to create the deployment in a Minikube cluster. And for the purpose of verification, what I have done is I have ran the kubectl service command. This thing is everything is automated in GitHub Action workflow itself, right? So once after the deployment is over, I'm using kubectl service command to expose the service, and then doing the port forwarding to make it available in the local host port 1718, right? So in the workflow itself, I also ran the curl command to verify it is showing the expected output, right? So the below part, as I mentioned, is continuous deployment in my demo scenario, wherein I am automatically creating the environment using Terraform and deploying the respective image from the Docker Hub registry, and then exposing the port. So this kind of scenario can be replicated to cloud scenario as well, wherein we can create instead of Minikube cluster, we can create EKS cluster to deploy our code, and we can expose the endpoint to access the application that is running in the port 1718, right? So that's about the demo scenario. So yeah, so that's about the demo scenario, and in the upcoming session, I'll be taking you guys through the code base I have created for the Colab, and then we will understand one by one what we have done in the Golang repository, right? So that's about it for the today's part two session in the introduction to DevOps practices, right? Okay, I think that's it. Right, that's it, right. So, if you if you guys having any questions, please post it in the chat, and we will. I'll just go through the questions and I'll answer them. Right? Okay. So yeah, I think that's it, guys. Thank you, and I'll meet you in the next session. Okay. Bye bye.